Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with the new fanfic. And if you enjoy the fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic.
Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto died at the Valley of the End and returned as Chaos, Chosen. Part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. Two screams were heard over the sound of a titanic battle. Chidori, Rasengan. As both attacks met there was a huge explosion and as both figures fell to the ground, one figure was dead with pain, while the other from exhaustion. The one who was tired from exhaustion laughed insanely, as he looked at the dead body before turning and running away. After he was gone a figure appeared over the body of the dead one and said, Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze Ha, the spiraling maelstrom of wave and wind. The controlled chaos, I think you will make a grand champion. As he picked up Naruto body and disappeared into a black void. Just then a man with gray hair and one normal eye appeared looking over the valley. He saw the blood on the ground and thought, oh God, I'm too late. As he tried to find either of his students, Naruto groaned as he opened his eyes and looked around. He found himself in some kind of ancient-looking temple. There were flame torches on the wall and stone pillars all over the place. He looked around and thought, where am I? A voice said, you are in my temple, drawing Naruto's attention. Naruto looked around and saw a man sitting on a throne at the top of a set of stairs. Naruto asked, who are you? And how did I get here? The man said, I am the god of chaos, as for how you got here I brought you here, young Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto asked, how do you know me? And why did you bring me here? As he looked around, Chaos said, relax boy, the only two people here are you and me. As for how I know who you are I have watched you for some time and you have impressed me. You have impressed me so much that I am going to make you my champion. Naruto said, huh, as he rubbed his head confused. Chaos said, relax and I will explain. Have you ever looked at the night sky and noticed how the stars make the shape of something like a scorpion or an archer or something like that? Naruto scratched his head. He did, didn't he? Yeah, I have. What about them? He asked, puzzled. Chaos said, you see, those stars are called constellations. They are designed like that because a god like myself chose a champion who went after receiving a gift or two from the gods and then went out and became so legendary the king of the gods made the constellation to remember the champion for all of time. I have decided I want to have a champion so I am going to choose you. Naruto said, me, champion. He saw a look on Chaos' face that screamed, yes. Chaos said, do not worry about why and what. Here is all you need to know. I am going to give you a couple of gifts similar to bloodlines. Then I am going to send you to a few places to learn how to use your gifts. Then you will be returned to your home of Konoha at the age of 4 after you have learned how to use your new gifts and then you are going to do whatever the hell you want to. That's it. Naruto said, wait, you mean you're going to give me a bloodline, train me to use it and then leave me alone? Chaos nodded, and Naruto's brows furrowed. What's the catch? Chaos said, the catch is this. If you become famous like the other champions of other gods then the king of the gods will make a constellation in memory of you and then I get to brag to the other gods that there is my champion, the one I chose to be the best. That's all I ask of you, to become the best. After you're done learning how to use you gifts then you go back to Konoha the day you get your apartment for the first time and do whatever you want. Except, Naruto looked at him and said, except what? What's the catch? As he eyed Chaos, Chaos said, you can't tell anyone that you know the future when you return to Konoha at the age of 4, and if people ask where did you get your gifts, say you don't know. That's it. That way nobody thinks you're crazy or something like that. Does that make sense? Before Naruto had a chance to say anything, he found himself falling out of the sky and landing in the middle of a lot of water. Naruto screamed and quickly got to the surface before he drowned, and he saw he was in the ocean near an island. Naruto began to swim toward the island when a man appeared in front of him, grabbed his arm, and then he was standing on the beach. Naruto blinked and looked at the man and then at the ocean and then at the man again and asked, "How did you do that?" The man looked at him for several seconds and said, "The same way you got here. I jumped." "Where are your clothes?" Naruto looked down to see that his clothes were gone, and he saw on his chest the scar from the Chidori, and he quickly covered himself and said, I don't know. I had them on a few moments ago." The man asked, "So how did you jump here, kid? I thought nobody knew about my island." Naruto said, "I don't know. One minute this guy was talking something crazy about gods, and then the next moment I was falling into the ocean. Where am I anyways?" The man sighed and said, "Must have been a paladin. You're lucky to be alive, kid, then. As for where you are, we're on a private island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean where no one but me and my wife ever comes to. Somehow you must have accessed one of my jump spots to come here. Name's David," Naruto said. "Naruto," as he tried to cover himself. David said, "Come on, kid. I think I might have some cloths at my house you can have," as he began leading Naruto away from the beach. Naruto followed and soon found a nice 2-story house in a clearing in the woods, and David said, "Hey Millie, we got company. Can you go into the kitchen so I can get this kid some cloths? He jumped here and I think it's his first," as he walked up on the porch. Naruto followed him inside and then down a hall till they came to a bedroom, and David looked through a closet a few minutes and said, "Here," as he tossed some clothes over his shoulder. Naruto grabbed them and said, "Thanks," as he saw they were a pair of shorts and a t-shirt. He sighed and slipped them on. David turned around and said, "So kid, where are you from?" Naruto, as he pulls the shirt on, said, "Konoha." David blinked and said, "Never heard of it. What country?" Naruto said, "Fire country." David blinked again and said, "I thought I have been to every country before." "What nation is that in?" Naruto looked at him and said, "The elemental nations. Why?" As if David was stupid or something. David sighed and said, "Well, I never heard of any of those places, so I guess you're going to have to figure out how to get back there yourself." Naruto asked, How do I do that?" David sighed and Naruto's stomach growled at that moment, and David began to laugh as Naruto looked sheepish and said, "Come on kid, let's get you something to eat." "So how old are you?" Naruto said, 15. David nods and said, "I made my first jump when I was 5, but then I didn't do it again until I was 15. I did it on accident both times. If you want, I can teach you how to use it. Give you a fighting chance against the paladins if they come after you again." Naruto asked, "Who exactly are the paladins and what do you mean jumping?" "This is all new to me." David said, "Don't worry kid. I will explain after we eat. Hey Millie, the kid's decent." Naruto watched as a brown-haired woman in her early 30s walked out of the kitchen, and she looked like she was pregnant, and she said, "Hello there, I'm Millie." Naruto said, "Nice to meet you. I'm Naruto." Naruto's stomach growled again and Millie laughed and said, "Just sit down and I will bring some sandwiches I made out," as she walked back into the kitchen and then returned a few seconds later with a tray of sandwiches. Naruto sat down at the table with both of them and they each started to eat the sandwiches, and Naruto said, "Hey, these are pretty good." Millie said, "It's just bologna and ham sandwiches." Naruto said, "Well, they're still pretty good. Back home all I can eat is ramen," as he eats a second sandwich half. David looked at him and asked, "Why? Don't your parent cook for you?" Naruto looked down and said, I don't have any." David said, "Oh, I'm sorry. My mother left me and my dad when I was 5. I know how it feels. Naruto said. I never knew my parents. I was told they both died the day I was born when Kyuubi attacked. Millie asked, Kyuubi, what's that? Naruto's eyes got wide and he looked at her shocked and said, you mean you don't know about Kyuubi? I thought everyone knew about him. David said. Sorry kid, most of the stuff you talk about is something we've never even heard of before, like Konoha, Fire Country, Elemental Nations. Naruto blinked and asked, where the heck did I come to? Fire Country's the largest country in the world. Millie looked at Naruto and said, I will be right back Naruto. As she got up and a few minutes later she came back with a globe and she set it down and said, can you show us where you're from here? Naruto looked at the globe and asked, what are these places? As he looked trying to find something that looked familiar. David said, that's a globe of the world kid, it has every country on it. Naruto looked at him shocked and said, but, where's my home then? I don't understand. None of this looks like my home. Millie said, David, I don't know why, but I don't think he jumped from here. David said, I think you might be right. I know it's crazy but I remember hearing about a guy who wanted to jump to the moon once. Perhaps this kid might have jumped from another planet or something on accident, or perhaps he's from an island that is so small that nobody has ever found it like this place. I guess the only thing we can do is help him learn about jumping and then see if he can jump back home. Naruto, who was looking confused and saddened before, suddenly got misty-eyed and said, oh thank you thank you thank you. I don't know what I can do to thank you. As he hugged David to death. David said in gasping breath, air, need air. Naruto looked sheepish as he let go and David gasped for breath and asked, what the hell are you kid? Naruto said, I'm a ninja. David blinked and said, a ninja, really? Naruto said, yeah, I'm a genin right now. I would have made Chunin if that hubby Tem hadn't attacked Konoha. David sighed and said, forget it kid. I am not going to ask. Let's just go outside and I will teach you how to use your powers and then tell you about paladins. Naruto said, okay. As he got up and followed David outside. David said, all right kid. Now you see that tree over there. Naruto looked where he was pointing and then David was standing next to the tree and Naruto got wide-eyed and looked back and forward and said, cool. David said, to use your power, picture yourself standing where you want to be. If you have been there before or can see it then you can jump there. Naruto looked at the tree and then the next moment his nose was smacked against the tree with an audible crack. David winced and said, sorry kid, forgot that you have to learn to stop moving. Here, let me help. As he went to help as best as he could. Naruto said, don't worry about it. As he popped it back in place and it healed quickly. David's eyes got wide and asked, how did you do that? Naruto looked confused and asked, do what? David said, fix your nose like that. Naruto thought a second and said, oh that. I heal real quick for some reason. David could only nod and asked, so do you want to try it again? Naruto said, yeah. David said, okay, try jumping to places around the field here. Naruto looked and then a few seconds later he was across the clearing. David said, good, let's see how good you are. Let's play a game of tag. I will jump and then you have to tag me by jumping trying to catch me. Okay. Naruto said, yes. David nods and then jumps and Naruto looks and sees him and jumps, but when he appears again David had already moved. Naruto then tried again and again as David slowly picked up speed. After about 30 minutes David was panting, as was Naruto. He said, okay, that's enough for now. Naruto nods and David said, okay, you seem to understand basic jumping. The only restriction with jumping is that you either have to be able to see where you want to jump or been there before. That should be how you get home, but rest for now. I need to tell you about paladins. Naruto nods and they both sit down and David said, okay, paladins hunt jumpers like us. They were created because of religious belief that only God has the right to go anywhere they want. They have weapons that are specifically made to kill us. They hit us with electricity, which makes it nearly impossible to jump, so be sure to avoid electric wires and any of their weapons. If you can't jump, you're as good as dead, Naruto said, so avoid electric attacks. Guess that's how Sasuke was able to hurt me, as he rubbed his chest where the Chidori hit. David said, yeah, it's best to just avoid them. The best policy when fighting a paladin is if there is just one of them and several jumpers tag team him and take him out. If you are one-on-one or outnumbered, get out of there using multiple jumps to different areas. They have been hunting our kind for hundreds of years and are really good at it. Naruto nods and said, thanks for telling me all this. David said, hey, we have to look after our own kind. Besides, I may not be there when my son needs help, so maybe by helping you someday you or someone you helped will help my son. Naruto said, deal. If I can, I will help your son if he needs it. David smiles and said, well, let's go get some sleep and tomorrow you can try to jump back home, but try not to come back here again. Paladins can track us through our jump sites and I don't want them to find this place and my wife. Naruto said, okay. I won't come back again if that's what you want. David gave him a sad smile and said, it's not you, kid. I just want to protect my family. Naruto smiled and said, I understand. A friend of mine told me once that when you have something precious to protect, only then would you find true strength. David said, your friend's right, and I only ask you not to come back so I can protect my precious wife and unborn son. Naruto said, you have my word, I won't come back, but if you ever need me, find me and I will come. David nodded and Naruto started to go inside when the next moment he fell and hit a wooden floor hard. He raised his head and said, ow. As he fell forward, passed out. David looked at where Naruto was moments ago, and sighed and said, you didn't have to leave already though, sadly. With Naruto, a woman with black hair tied in a ponytail in a pair of short blue shorts and a black shirt with two gun holsters on her hip walked over and said, well, what do we have here? As she gently kicked Naruto in the side and he did not move. A short brown hair man walked up and asked, who is this Lara? Lara said, I don't know Noah. He appeared out of thin air just like that. He's got a nice, though. Noah snorted and said, want me to call the police for our little streaker here? Lara looked at Naruto a moment and said, nah, we haven't had any excitement in a while. This kid could be just what we need. She then looked at Noah and then at Naruto and said, you think you could find him some clothes? I don't mind having a guest for a little while, but unless I'm screwing I try to stay with clothed men, especially jailbait. Noah laughed and said, only you would joke about that. I shall check for you, Lady Croft. As he bowed and left mockingly. Lara glared at him and Naruto groaned and he started to stir and Lara put her foot on his back and said, hold it, as she pulled out her pistol. Naruto turned and looked at her and he asked, who are you and where am I? Lara said, I am Lady Lara Croft and this is my home. Now answer me, who are you and what are you doing here? Naruto looked at her hand and asked, is that a weapon? Lara blinked and asked, you don't know what a gun is? Naruto said, no, why? Lara fired a shot in the ground next to Naruto's head and he heard the noise and saw the cracked wood it caused with wide-eyed and he said quickly, don't hurt me. I will talk. Lara said, good. Now tell me, who are you and what are you doing here? Naruto said, I'm Naruto Uzumaki, Genin of Konoha and I guess I jumped here. Before Lara could say anything, Noah came running back in with a set of cloths in his hand and said, Lara, is everything okay? Lara turned her head and Naruto took that moment to jump across the room behind a desk. Lara blinked as Naruto's body disappeared and her foot fell to the floor, and she looked around and saw Naruto's foot sticking out from behind the desk, and she said, I know you're behind the desk, come out or I will shoot. Naruto gulped and said, Don't shoot. I'm not armed. As he stood up slowly, Lara had both her pistols out and pointed at him, and Naruto asked, What now? Lara said after glaring at him for several moments, Get dressed and we're going to talk. Naruto nodded and groaned as he looked at his body again, and Noah tossed the clothes to him and Naruto asked, Are you a paladin? Lara narrowed her eyes and said, No. The paladins died out years ago during the Great Crusades. Naruto said, That's not possible. They hunt and kill those like me, or at least that's what I was told. Lara asked, What do you mean those like you? As Naruto slipped on a pair of sweatpants. Naruto pulled on a shirt and then looked at Lara and then appeared beside her, grabbing her arm and pinning it behind her, and said, Jumpers. Lara turned her head, and before Naruto knew it, she had put her foot between his and tripped him, freeing her arm, and held the gun at his head as he fell on the floor, and she said, I was right. I think having you here is going to be fun. Naruto groaned as Lara tied his hands behind his back and then pulled him up and threw him into a chair and said, Now, tell me your story. Naruto sighed and said, Like I said, I'm Naruto Uzumaki, Genin of Konoha. I was on a mission tracking down my teammate who defected from our village when we fought, and he stabbed me in the chest with a chidori. I woke up to this guy who called himself the God of Chaos, and he said he was going to give me a gift and send me to learn to use it. Before I knew it, I was on an island, and this guy who could jump like I did a few minutes ago taught me how to jump and then told me about paladins. The next thing I know, I hit your floor and then woke up here. Lara asked, And your clothes? Naruto said, Don't know. When I first appeared in front of the guy who taught me how to jump, I was as well. He gave me clothes also. Maybe it has something to do with me not actually doing the jumping. I don't know. Before I met that guy, the first never even knew of jumping. Lara asked, Noah. Noah said, Voice readout shows he's telling the truth. Naruto blinked and asked, What? Lara asked, How old are you, kid? Naruto said, 15. Lara said, You're short for your age, kid. Naruto sighed and said, It's probably 'cause I don't eat right, or at least that's what everyone tells me back home. Stupid villagers. Mumbled Naruto, but not quite enough not to be unheard. Lara asked, What do you mean? Naruto looked up and said, Oh, nothing. Don't worry about it. As he tried to act chipper. Noah said, He's lying. Naruto tried to turn his head and Lara pointed her pistols and said, Talk. Naruto gulped and said, Do you know who Kyuubi is? Lara said, Maybe, what about it? Naruto said, Do you know what a Jinchuriki is? Lara said, Noah. Noah said, I have both. Lara. Kyuubi no Kitsune is said to have the ability to see and hear anything in the world. Said to be wise and powerful, it's connected with the legends of Inari. As for the word Jinchuriki, it means the power of human sacrifice or host. Naruto gulped and said, Yeah, the Kyuubi's powerful, but as for wise, I think he's a big idiot. I'm a Jinchuriki. The day I was born, the Yondaime Hokage of my village sealed Kyuubi inside of me at the cost of his own life. That's why I have these whiskers on my face. Most of the people in my village think I am actually the demon Kyuubi or Kyuubi reborn in human form, and have tried to kill me or weaken me by not selling me food. The only clothes I could buy were bright orange. They were trying to limit my knowledge. Until I graduated from the academy after failing 3 times did I learn why I was hated. One of the teachers told me if I stole a special scroll then I would graduate, but after I stole it and learned one jutsu from it he showed up and tried to kill me and another teacher who actually tried to help me. I wound up beating him and that's how I became a ninja. Lara said. You said Kyuubi is sealed in you. Besides the whiskers you have any proof? Naruto said. If you cut me you will see I heal real quick, and also I have a seal on my stomach that appears when I channel chakra. Lara asked. Chakra, that's an Indian belief. Naruto asked. Indian? What's India? Lara said. Where exactly are you from? I mean, where is this Konoha you talked about? Naruto sighed and said. Konoha is in the fire country, which is in the elemental nations. I was already showed something called a world globe and I couldn't find my home or any of our neighboring countries. Naruto heard a typing noise behind him and Noah said, strange. Lara asked, what? Noah said, when I ran the search on that all a little earlier I didn't find anything, but after I cross-referenced it by linking up to the national database I found some archive from the late 1800s that talked about a Naruto Uzumaki of Konoha who was at one time the apprentice of, believe it or not, William H. Bonney. Naruto said, who? Lara said, what, are you sure? As she looked at Noah and then Naruto. Noah said, that's not all. I am getting hits from all over the history of the world on him. I got him apprenticing under the legendary assassin named Rurouni Kenshin, the Manslayer. I got hits from the Dark Ages of him apprenticing in Camelot. I got hits of him in ancient Indian tribes in North America. I got hits also of him in half a dozen other random places in time, going all the way back to ancient Egypt and also as close as the Vietnam War. Either this kid's has hacked the history archives, which would be damn near impossible, his family's set up one hell of a hoax all through history, or this kid's here a time traveler. As he looked at Naruto. Naruto said, time, travel. But I never even heard or been to any of those places. I swear. As he looked scared. Lara said, so basically this kid's been learning under the best of the best all through time, if you were to guess. Noah said, yeah, that seems the only thing I can think of, which would also explain why he's here. To learn from you, the best Tomb Raider. Whoever this god of chaos guy he met might be the one who's actually pulling the strings though. Naruto sighed as Lara put her guns away and said, so, what exactly is the deal with this chaos guy kid? Naruto said, all I know is he said something about the star constellations being created by the king of the gods in patterns like the champions of the other gods to remember their champion. Noah said, sounds sort of like the Greek legends about Orion, scorpions and all the others. Lara said, so what does he want to do with them? Naruto said, all I know is he said he wanted me to become famous enough where they will make a constellation about me so he could brag to the other gods. I don't know anything else. Lara frowned and Noah said, he's telling the truth. Lara sighed and said, well, pull up the file on where you say he's been or will be. See if we can figure out this little puzzle. Noah snorted and said, and the great lady Lara Croft has found another tomb to raid. Naruto asked, what's going to happen to me? Lara said, we're going to see if we can't figure you out. As she smiles and walks over to Noah. Naruto asked, can I get up? Lara said, yeah, come over here and let's see if you recognize any of this stuff. As she sat down and put her legs on the computer desk as she grabbed a cup of tea to sip. Noah was typing on the computer and Naruto walked over and Lara said, start with Bonney. Naruto asked, who is William H. Bonney? Noah pulled up a file on the computer and said, William H. Bonney, also known as Henry McCarty and Billy the Kid, was an outlaw during the 1870s, give or take 10 years. Naruto was looking at the screen listening to Noah, and then when he looked at the picture of Bonney he disappeared, shocking both Lara and Noah. Lara said, well, that's different. Pull up the room video camera for me and show me everything that's happened since he arrived. Lara watched as the video played and she said, do it again but slower. Lara watched and Noah asked, what are you looking for? Lara said, it's not what I was looking for, it's what he was looking for. Noah said, what? Lara said, look at the video again and watch as he jumps both times in the rooms. Look at where his eyes go. Noah played it again and said, so he jumps where he can see. Lara said, and now look at the last jump. Noah did and said, I see, he jumped when he laid eyes on the picture. Lara nods and said, well, inform me if he comes back and keep running historical references to him. I want to know what this kid's learning. As she left, Naruto blinked as he fell to the ground and coughed as his face was in sand. He heard a click behind him and a familiar feeling behind his head. He groaned and said, what now? A voice said, hello kid, you want me to make you famous? Naruto turned and saw a guy with big teeth in the front and strange clothes and said, you're Bonnie, aren't you? The guy who held a pistol against the back of Naruto's head said, most call me Billy the Kid. Naruto then said, you mind if I stand up? The ground's burning my back, if you know what I mean. Billy said, first, who are you? Naruto said, Naruto Uzumaki from Konoha. Billy said, never heard of you. What are you doing here? Naruto said, truthfully, I don't know. One moment I was talking to this nice-looking lady and the next I'm laying face down here without any clothes on. Billy looked around and said, someone must have thrown you out of one of the windows of the saloon. Since you're not armed, go ahead and get up. As he steps back and puts his pistol away. Naruto got up and said, thanks. You wouldn't happen to know where I can get some cloths, do you? Billy said, you got any money? Naruto's sweat dropped and said, I left my wallet in my other pants. As he raised his arms like an idiot. Billy snickered and said, you're all right kid, so tell me, what are you doing all the way out here in New Mexico? Naruto said, I don't know. I got in a fight, woke up in a strange place, next thing I know people are appearing everywhere with guns at my head. Billy said, sounds familiar, you got a place to stay? Naruto sighed and said, no, just jumping from place to place mostly. Billy said, well, you got any skills? Naruto said, not really, at least not anything I could do here. As he looked around. Billy looked at Naruto and said, tell you what kid, I'm getting ready to round up some friends to get some revenge against a guy who had a friend of mine murdered so he could take his home. You want to help me? Naruto thought a moment and a memory of Gato appeared and said, sure, I hate assholes who hurt people like that. Billy said, then come with me and we will get you some supplies. Naruto followed and Billy asked as they walked out of the alley, you know how to use a gun? Naruto said, no, but I can learn. Billy said, good answer. As he walked into a store with Naruto following, ignoring the people staring at them. A woman in her early 20s came out of the back with brown hair and brown eyes and went wide at Naruto as she looked him up and down as he tried to cover himself and said, hello sweets, you need something? Billy smirked as he snuck out the door and Naruto, who was trying to be modest, said, I kind of need some clothes. The woman said, really, so you have any money? Naruto groaned and looked behind him for Billy and sweat dropped and thought as he saw he was gone, what now? As he turned back and said, no, my money was in my cloths before I woke up. The woman sighed and said, someone bushwhacked you, huh? So how do you plan to pay for the cloths? I don't do credit. Naruto said, can I work them off somehow? I can help around here until they're paid for or something. The woman said, what's your name? I'm Selen. Naruto said, Naruto Uzumaki. as he went to rub the back of his head only to catch himself and quickly covered himself again. Selen said, "You seem kind of bashful, you never been with a woman, have you?" Naruto's sweat dropped and said, No. Outside, both Naruto and Selen could have sworn they heard someone fall against the wood pile, and Selen looked at the window at the top of the wall and said, "So, you got a girl?" Naruto started to open his mouth and then a flashback hit him of Sakura crying asking him to bring Sasuke back, and he said, "No, I thought I did, but she never returned my feelings." Selen said, "I see. Tell you what, go on to the back with me and let's see what we can find for you," as she motioned for the door behind her and she walked over and closed the front door to the store. Naruto quickly walked to the back while her back was turned. He found himself in a stockroom and Selen walked back to the back and closed the door and said, "Don't want to be disturbed while we try to find you some clothes. So tell me, how old are you, Naruto?" Naruto said, 15. Selen stopped and looked at him and he said, "I'm short for my age." Selen turned back and pulled out a few pairs of pants and said, "Try these on," as she handed them to Naruto. Naruto grabbed them and tried them on, and after the third pair found some that worked and Selen handed him a shirt and he buttoned it up and she said, "Nice, real nice." Naruto said, Thanks. How can I pay for these?" Selen walked over and she put her arms around his shoulder and said, "I think I can find a way for you to pay me." Naruto was uncomfortable and asked, "Ho?" as she pressed her lips to his. He went wide-eyed a moment as she deepened the kiss and he saw her eyes were closed and he slowly closed his eyes and returned the kiss. He felt Selen's hand on his crotch and he moaned as she rubbed him and he broke the kiss and she smiled and said, "Relax. I haven't had anyone make me feel like a woman since my husband died 2 years ago during a robbery." Naruto said, "But, I never." She pressed her finger to his lips and said, "I know. Relax and I will help you, okay?" Naruto, after she pulled her finger away, said, "But we don't know each other." Selen said, "Listen, I'm 22 and a widow in a town where your life is worth less than the price of a bullet. I could die later today or live to be an old woman. I want to feel like a beautiful woman at least once more before I die." Naruto said, "But you are beautiful." Selen smiled and said, "Thank you, so do we have a deal? You make me feel loved again, even for a little while, and you can have the clothes." Naruto saw the sadness in her eyes and he slowly leaned forward and kissed her. She smiled as she then returned the kiss and began to rub his crotch again. She broke the kiss and stepped back a little and Naruto watched as she slid out of her dress and his eyes got wide and whispered, "Wow," and she blushed a little and she walked over and took off his shirt as she kissed him again as she rubbed him with her leg. Naruto felt her loosen his pants as they fell to the floor and he gulped and asked, "What now?" Selen laughed as she laid a blanket she pulled from a shelf on the floor and said, "Now, you lie down on the blanket here and I will show you what to do." Naruto did and she slowly walked over to him and leaned down to kiss him and Naruto felt her slide on top of his chest and she grabbed his hand and put them on her and moved his hand showing him what to do. Naruto continued to kiss her as he followed her lead and she began to use her knee to rub his crotch earning him a moan with her. Naruto broke the kiss and looked at her as he slowly began to kiss her neck and then trailed down to her and she gasped as he licked her nipples while playing with the other. Selen began to grind her hips against his leg she was straddling and he began using his knee to rub her as well. It wasn't long before he felt her shudder and gasp and he stopped and she said, "Don't stop, please," as she panted. Naruto continued to rub her and crotch while licking the other. Selen finally had enough and she pressed her lips to his again and he felt her body move and then he felt a warm sensation go through his body as she broke the kiss and leaned back. Naruto looked down where she was sitting and she smiled as she began to move slowly and then faster. Naruto closed his eyes and began to realize what to do as he began to get into it. As she climaxed, Naruto leaned up and kissed her before flipping her on her back, and she was wide-eyed as he began going again much faster, and she wrapped her legs around him and she soon found herself in heaven as she climaxed again. As she felt a third oncoming on, she saw Naruto was getting a worried look on her face and she thought, he's worried about if he gets me pregnant. I guess he really was innocent. And said, it's okay, go ahead. In gasped breaths. Naruto looked at her and she said, I know, I want it. She panted out. Naruto thought, how did she know? As he got faster and then he went rigid as both him and her climaxed together before he felt all his energy leave him and he fell on top of her panting. She leaned up and kissed him and held him close and they laid there for a little while and he asked, how did you know what I was thinking? Selen said, you had the same look my late husband had the first time we done it, as she rubbed his hair away from his face. Naruto said, but, Selen said, but what will happen if I get pregnant or if I never see you again? I realized before this ever happened I may never see you again. I told you already it's okay, I could die later today and it would not matter. All that matters is right now you made me feel alive for the first time in a long time. Thank you. As she kissed him. Naruto sighed as he held her and they just held each other for what seemed like forever. The bell rang over the door out front and Selen laid her head into the crook of Naruto's neck and said, I guess it was too good to go on. As she slowly sat up and said loudly, be out in a minute. As she began to get back dressed. Naruto, when she was dressed, got up and quickly pulled her into a kiss and a hug and she let a tear fall as she left. As Naruto began to get dressed he heard the sound of a gun go off. Naruto's eyes got wide as he quickly ran out of the back with fear and he ran into the other room and he saw Selen bleeding on the floor and a man standing over her and Naruto's eyes began to go red as the man turned the gun he had in his hands at Naruto and he flashed behind the man, grabbing his arm and pulling it back, breaking the arm as he grabbed the gun from the man's hand, put it in his back, and before he realized it he had fired a shot right into the man. Naruto was shocked by this as he saw the man slowly fall to the ground, but he thought, Selen, as he dropped the gun and ran over to her. Naruto picked her up and said in a worried voice, Selen, can you hear me? Selen slowly opened her eyes and she coughed up some blood and she smiled sadly at Naruto as she rubbed his face slowly and said, thank you for making me feel alive one last time. As she reached toward her neck and grabbed a necklace as she pulled it off and she grabbed Naruto's hand and she said, promise me you will live life to the fullest, like there's no tomorrow. Please. Naruto watched as her eyes began to gloss over as her hand that was in his slowly fell away, leaving a golden cross, and he held her close as tears fell from his eyes and whispered, I promise. Naruto heard a voice say, hold it, as he heard the click of a gun. Naruto froze with Selen still in his arm and he slowly stood up and turned with his hand above his head and he saw a man with a star on his chest and another man beside him, and the shorter man said, that's him, Sheriff, that's the guy who was with Billy the Kid. The sheriff said, looks like you're following in his footsteps, kid, murdering 2 of my townsfolk. Naruto said, I didn't kill her, I killed the guy who killed her though. I wouldn't kill her, we cared for each other. The sheriff said, nice try, kid, but she has vowed never to be with anyone after her husband was killed. I think I will save us a trial and kill you here. Naruto looked over at the gun on the floor and then at the sheriff and he watched as the sheriff began to move his finger and Naruto flashed to the gun he dropped earlier and began to turn on the sheriff with it, but then he felt himself fall to the ground again. Naruto looked around worried and he heard a familiar voice said, I see you're back. Naruto turned and before he had a chance to say anything he was hit over the back of the head, knocked out. Naruto awoke to find himself inside his mind and he groaned and thought, what now? As he began to walk toward where Kyuubi was. When Naruto got to Kyuubi's cage he went wide-eyed as he found it was different. He looked around and saw the cloths he had been getting along with the gun and the cross, his orange jumpsuit and a mirror with a face on it, and the mirror spoke, "Hello Naruto." Naruto went wide-eyed and asked, "Who are you?" The mirror said, "I am an oracle of time. I was given to you to allow you to use your jump to anywhere in time. I have been the one who has been taking you to different places to learn things." Naruto narrowed his eyes and said, "So you're the reason Selen died?" The oracle said, "No, she would have died no matter what. The only difference between what did happen and what was supposed to happen was that instead of her killer being killed by the sheriff, you killed him and the sheriff put you down as a wanted man for killing both." Naruto said, "But why did you send me there? I didn't learn anything." The oracle said, "You learned what love was and you also learned what loss and how it feels to kill. You have never killed before and you have never truly loved before, so that is why I sent you there." Naruto asked, "Where is Kyuubi?" The oracle said, "Kyuubi power is still here, but the fox was taken care of. Chaos didn't want the fox to ruin your chance to become famous, so he left you his power but not the fox itself. I control it now for you, so don't worry about it." Naruto looked around and he walked over to the cross, and the oracle said, "Anything you have on or are holding when you jump in time will be pulled inside your mind here to be used later by you. That's why you always wind up when you jump times." Naruto asked, "So how do I get them out of me?" The oracle said, "Simple boy, all you have to do is picture the object as it is in here and hold out your hand and they will come out if it's an object, and picture the cloths on you and they will come out. It's all a combination of your jump ability. Normally you could jump anywhere you have been. Thanks to Chaos and me you can jump anywhen also. I'm just taking to places to learn first before you return to start your own journey." Naruto asked, "Wait a minute, you said I changed time when I was with Selen, can I do that anywhere?" The oracle said, "No. There are things that will happen no matter what. Selen dying that day by that man, the Kyuubi being sealed in you, the Yondaime dying, all those things happen for a reason because the gods of fate and destiny have made them that way. You, however, Naruto, are an exception to the rule. All Jinchuriki are automatically assumed to be lost in the fabric of fate and destiny because their lives are too unpredictable for even gods to guess. That is why your own life you will be able to change greatly, but those of the past you can only change a little." Before Naruto had a chance to say anything else, he found himself waking up with a jar, and he blinked and he heard a voice say, "I see you're awake." Naruto looked over and saw Lara and he asked, "What's happening?" As he felt they were moving but all he could see were metal walls and seats. Lara said, "Well, it's been about 2 days since you first got here. You left for about 3 hours and popped back yesterday, and I knocked you out and kept you sedated until now, but it looked like you had a little excitement in New Mexico. A wanted poster said you killed 2 people. Naruto looked down and saw he was dressed in a pair of black pants and a black shirt, and he held out his hand and concentrated, and the cross appeared in his hand, and he said, "No, just one," as he looked sadly at the cross. Lara said, "Tell me what happened," as she eyed him and the cross. Naruto sighed and said, "I appeared in this little town in the desert. I was again, and before I had a chance to move I heard a gun click and heard a voice ask me if I wanted him to make me famous. It turned out it was Bonnie. After he asked me a few questions about how I got there, he said something about me falling out of a saloon window. He then asked me if I wanted a chance to help him get revenge for his friend who was killed so this other guy could steal his friend's land. It reminded me of a recent mission I had and I agreed since I hate seeing others get hurt like that. He then led me to this store still and people were looking at us, and when we were inside this woman, as Naruto's eyes began to water as he swallowed. Lara asked, "What happened?" Naruto closed his eyes and said, We had something." Lara said, "So you got close to her?" Naruto sighed and said, I don't know how to explain it. She made me feel special and we only knew each other just a little bit. Bonnie had left right after we got there and she got me some clothes and then she. Lara leaned forward and asked, "She what?" Naruto closed his eyes and said, "She told me how she was a widow, her husband had been killed 2 years ago. She told me she wanted to feel alive, like a beautiful woman again. She said her life was worth less than the price of a bullet in that town. She understood me more than anyone ever has. She knew what I was thinking, what I was feeling. It was amazing. I never felt anything like that before." Lara eyed him and said, "So, you loved her?" Naruto looked down and said, "I guess you could call it that. She was beautiful and to her, our age didn't matter. For the first time in my life I actually felt like I was somebody and I never wanted to leave that moment." Then the store bell rang and she started getting ready to go out front. I don't know why but I knew that something was going to happen so I pulled her close to me again before she left. As I was getting dressed I heard a shot and I quickly ran to the front. I saw her laying on the floor bleeding and a man standing over her with a gun. He started to turn it on me but then I jumped behind him and Lara said, "You killed him?" Naruto nods and said, "I was shocked when I did it. I took his gun and shot him with it. I then dropped it and ran to Selen. She was still alive but barely and she asked me to promise her that I would live my life to the fullest, like there's no tomorrow. She then gave me this and she died in my arms. Then someone told me to hold it and when accused me of killing her and the guy the first did. He called himself a sheriff and when I told him I only killed the guy and I wouldn't ever hurt her he called me a liar and said he wasn't even going to waste time with a trial. I saw him getting ready to shoot and I flashed to the gun I dropped and then the next moment I was back in your place." Lara asked, "And how did you get the cross here?" Naruto sighed and said, "When you knocked me out I entered my mind. I thought it was Kyuubi calling me again so I went to where he usually is but everything was different. All the cloths I had on when I jumped times were there in like a storage and Kyuubi was gone but there was this talking mirror that called itself an oracle of time. It explained that my mind is like a storage room now where anything I am wearing or holding when I jump time is pulled to. It then explained how it was the one jumping me through time right now showing me places and told me how to get my stuff out. Then I woke up here and that's all I know." Lara said, "Well, did the truth serum work, Noah?" Noah's voice came from a speaker and said, "Yeah, we're about 2 hours out." Naruto asked, "Huh, what's going on?" Lara said, "I figured out how you're jumping time and from place to place and I also think I figured out why. You're getting training for later from the best of the best in each of our fields. I think your visit to the New Mexico was to help you emotionally more than anything since it affected you so much. You had an emotional mask on before you left but now it's gone. Whatever happened between you and her destroyed it completely. That's your business. I am the best at what I do. I am a tomb raider. I search for ancient artifacts that could result in the destruction of the world along with other things and ensure they don't destroy our world. I am going to teach you to be one as well but first I need to know you're not going to die in a tomb." Naruto was listening to her and asked, "What do you mean die in a tomb?" Lara laughed and said, "Most of the tombs I go in are set up with traps that are so amazing and complex they would kill you before you know it. Also most of them have people who would kill to get the item as well. So we are on our way to a place where I train sometimes to keep in shape and I called in a few favors to make it where you can too. For the next year you are going to be stuck here learning from me. If you notice that little watch on your arm right now you will find a little electricity is running through you." Naruto's eyes got wide and he went to open his mouth and Lara said, "I had Noah research your paladins. Turns out that there was information on jumpers and paladins in an ancient text archive that was in the Holy City. It was only telling how during the Great Crusades they would hunt jumpers during lightning storms because you were vulnerable. I had Noah test how your body handle electric when you were passed out and the skin sample tried to phase out of danger but couldn't. Don't worry about me using that to hunt you. It's just where we are going is a very special place and I don't want you using any special abilities or that chakra you claim to use while we're there. You are going to be trained by my home country's version of special forces. They think you are my new apprentice. Naruto asked, "Why are you doing this?" Lara opened up a folder that was beside her and threw a picture on the ground in front of Naruto and asked, "What do you see there?" Naruto said as he looked at the picture, "Funny pictures, why?" Lara said, "That writing is from an ancient tomb in Egypt. Most of it has been worn down by time so we can't figure out what it is talking about, but what we do know is something happened during the construction of that tomb and that you're involved in it. What we know about it is the pharaoh who was building this temple suddenly had his entire slave population disappear in a single day. The legend tells of a great weapon of shadow. I figured if you're involved you can help me figure out what happened, so if there really is a great weapon of shadows that can kill all those people in a single day, then I can make sure it doesn't fall in the wrong hands." Naruto gulps and said, "All right. If I find out what happened, then if I am able to come back here I will tell you." Lara said, "Deal. Now just remember that while you're here you do not use any chakra or try to jump. I do this as a living and I don't have your powers. You're going to have to learn not to rely on your powers and you will become stronger." Naruto thought a moment and said, "You're right. I got a friend named Rock Lee. He can't use chakra or jump but he's probably the actual strongest genin I know. He carries 2,000 pounds of weights on each of his legs." Lara's eyes got wide a moment and said, "I see. Is he the only one who does that?" Naruto said, "No, his sensei has 3,000 pounds on each leg. Both are considered taijutsu masters." Lara said, "So tell me, what year are you from?" Naruto said, 494 AC. Lara blinked and asked, "AC? What's that?" Naruto said, "After chakra. That's when they claim chakra was officially discovered and its method of usage." Lara asked, "What was before AC?" Naruto said, "I don't know. I do know that before that was basically called the Demon Wars. They say these great demons battled and destroyed most of our world and that most of our history was lost. We have things like TV and radio but not very many. They say a barrier was put up around the elemental nations that made it where none of the demons could ever come there again, but the Biju still are there, so I don't know if that's true or not. We mostly only focused on our village history and even then I was kicked out of class or ignored, so I didn't really get to know much and I wasn't allowed in the library." Lara's eyes narrowed and she said, "I see. Well, why don't you rest until we get there?" Naruto asked, "What is this thing we're in? How are we moving?" Lara said, "This is a private jet airplane. We're flying in the air right now, about 30,000 feet in the air. It's faster this way to travel great distances." Naruto's eyes were wide and he nods and asked a question that has been bothering him for a while, "Do you have a bathroom?" Lara blinked and said, "Yeah, just go down the hallway and it's marked on the door." Naruto nods and gets up and walks down the hall, and a little bit later he comes back and Lara is laying on her seat asleep and Naruto quietly sits down looking at her. Lara, whose eyes are still closed, asked, "Tell me about your adventures, kid." Naruto said, "Well," and he then told her about the wave mission, Chunin exams, Snow Country, Tea Country, getting Tsunade, and then Sasuke's defection. Naruto said, "After that last attack I woke up in front of chaos and you know the rest." Lara smiled and said, "Sounds like you had a lot of great adventures." Naruto said, "Thanks, though most of the time I felt like I really didn't do much. The people I wanted to save still all died, Gigi, Haku, Zabuza, Selen." As he looked down, Lara's eyes softened and said, You can't save everyone. Naruto asked as he looked at the floor. Does everyone who make me happy have to die? Am I supposed to live all my life in pain? Lara said. Our lives are unpredictable. Selen told you to live your life to the fullest, like there's no tomorrow. She's right. If you let the loss in your life take away from what you have in front of you, then you will never find true happiness. People die, objects fade away in time and forgotten. The world still goes on. If you really want to find happiness, do what you did in Wave, in Tea, and in Snow. Do what you did for Tsunade. If you do those things, then people will remember you. People will look up to you. People will want to be with you. If you want to find happiness, fight for it. Don't think about what you don't have and find what you do have. You have friends you made. You have people who look up to you. You are a hero to those people. If you ask them 20 years from now who was the biggest hero in their life, they will say you were. Naruto was looking at her in shock, and a smile slowly formed on his lips and he said, "Thank you." Lara said, "No problem. We should be getting ready to land soon, so buckle up like I am," as she showed him what to do. Naruto nodded and did it, and Noah's voice came over the radio. "We're preparing to land, Lara." Lara said, "Thanks, Noah," with a smirk. Naruto smiled also. When they landed, Naruto followed Noah, who came out of the front of the plane, and Lara down a small ladder, and he saw a group of 3 men in camo all standing there with a jeep, and one stepped forward and said, "It's good to see you again, Croft." Lara said, "And you, Rift? You know Noah and the boys, Naruto?" Rift looked at Naruto and said, "He doesn't appear to be much." Lara smirked and said, "I think you will find he's full of surprises." Rift nodded and said, "This is Tagger and Butch, both joined up recently." Lara nodded and said, "Right, well, let's get going." Rift said, "You have any bags?" Lara said, "Just nose. I still have my gear here, and Naruto's going to begin like a new recruit." Rift smirked and said, "A greenhorn, huh? This is going to be fun. Tagger, Butch, both of you begin his training. Run him back to base." Both men said, "Sir." "Yes, sir." As they walked over toward Naruto, and Butch screamed, "You heard him, maggot. Start running down the road. Move it, move it, move it." Naruto looked at Lara and received a punch in the face from Tagger, who screamed, "Don't look at her, maggot. You follow orders or you get shipped out." Naruto, who fell from the punch, rubbed his busted lip and smirked as he used what speed he had and sent a kick to Tagger's mouth from a springboard, and he jumped in the air to start a barrage on him when a knife hit him in the leg, and he saw it came from Lara, and she said, "Follow orders, kid, you're here to train," as she climbed in the jeep with Noah and drove away with Rift. Naruto had landed, as did Tagger, and he pulled out the knife, and Tagger rubbed his jaw and said as he tossed a first aid kit to Naruto, "Good kick, kid, but don't get. I could have killed you before that ever hit." Naruto caught the kit and threw it back and said, "It's already healed, let's go," as he began running. Both men looked at each other and then shrugged and began to run. Both were surprised Naruto was setting pace with them. A little over an hour later they arrived at a set of gates with a couple of guards who nods as they run past. Naruto began looking around, and Tagger said, "Not bad, kid. You have any kind of training?" Naruto said, "Basic academy back home." Butch asked, "Where's that?" Naruto said, "Konoha." Both men looked at each other and shrugged their shoulders, showing they never heard of it, and they slowed down as they approached a set of buildings, and Naruto said, "So what's next?" Tagger said, "Now we get you a haircut and then get you some gear." Naruto frowned and follows them as they walk into a building. They first stop at a barber who shaved Naruto's head, making him wide-eyed, and thought, "My hair," as anime tear appeared in his eyes. They then lead him to a supply room where another soldier quickly issued him some gear. Tagger said, "Good, now we will get you to your barracks and show you the mess hall, and then we will meet up with the general and find out what he wants done with you." As they took him to the general barracks where he changed into a pair of camo pants and a green t-shirt, and then the mess hall where they ate lunch. After that they went toward an administrative-looking building where they saw the Jeep from earlier parked, and Rift and Laura both were standing outside, and Rift said, "So, how's he stand up to our standards?" Butch said, "He's got good stamina and was able to keep pace with us the entire way. He said he had some training from an academy back in his home." Rift nods and said, "Good. Give him basic warm-ups for the rest of the day and begin training at 0400 hours tomorrow morning. Give him the full works. Lady Croft wants him up to speed fast, so don't give him any time to relax. If he can stand, he can train." Both men said, "Sir, yes sir," with a salute. Naruto watched as Laura and Rift left, and Butch said, "You heard them, get down and give me 100 push-ups." Naruto sighed as he dropped and began doing them. Tagger said, "I think this kid is making fun of us doing them that quick. Run back to barracks and grab your full gear, kid, and run back here. If you're not back 10 minutes you will be doing push-ups till dark. Move it, move it." Naruto quickly began running back to the barracks and thought, "Why can't I just kick their asses?" As he got his gear and ran back to them, Butch had a watch and said, "You took 14 minutes, kid. Put your gear on your back and begin your push-up." Naruto glared as he put the pack on his back, and he dropped and began doing push-ups. Tagger blinked and said, "Still too easy for you, kid. Let's see how you handle a little more weight." As he grabbed the spare tire off the back of the Jeep and put it on Naruto's back, and Naruto kept his pace going the same, shocking both men. Butch said, "You've done weight training before, haven't you, kid?" Naruto said, "Bite me baldy," as he kept pace. Butch glared and said, "Really? Let's see how you handle this," as he sat down on the tire. Naruto glared at him but kept going, shocking both men without missing a beat. Up in an office window 2 people were looking down, and one said, "Well, there's something you don't see every day." Laura said, "I told you the kid's impressive. I want you guys to max him out. Give him the gauntlet if you have to, but I want you to find his limits and then teach him to break them." Rift said, "Besides body conditioning, what do you want him to learn?" Laura said, "Marksmanship and hand-to-hand combat." Rift nods and said, "You owe me for this." Laura said, "The check is in the mail. I want him ready in 3 months. Rift said, "You told me a year." Laura said, "I want him up to a year's standard in 3 months. Rift blinked and looked at her and said, "You sure he can stand that, Laura?" "I mean, that could kill him." Laura said, "Yes, it needs to be done," as she glanced at the wall. Rift asked, "Who is he, really? I mean, you're not telling me everything." Laura said, "That's because it's not me you should be asking. Ask your brother," as she turned and walked away. Rift watched her leave, glaring at her, and he sighed as he glanced at the wall where his last picture of his brother was, and he asked, "So what do you know about this kid?" As he closed his eyes and looked out the window before walking back toward his desk. Laura, as she was walking down a hall, thought, "I wonder what you were doing there in Vietnam, Naruto." Naruto by the end of the day was sweating when Butch got off and took the tire off of him and said, "You can quit now." Naruto falls flat on his face and thought, "Thank God for chakra." It has been 3 months since Laura left Naruto at the military base. She walks toward a sparring circle where nearly everyone at the base was, and she asked, "So what's going on?" A private turned to her and said, "Who are you?" His answer was a slap on the back of the head from someone who said, "Idiot, that's Lady Croft. Let her through." Everyone seemed to move out of her way, and Laura walked through the crowd and blinked as she saw Naruto panting on top of a pile of 40 men, and he said in panting breath, "Who's next?" She then looked around the crowd and then at the men on the ground and thought, "Damn, those are most of the vets he's taken out." The rest of the grunts here haven't seen any true combat. If he's able to take them out, he's progressed faster than I thought, and said, I am. Naruto glanced at her and blinked a moment and said, You crazy bitch, do you have any idea what these assholes have put me through? Lara said, Not as much as I am about to put you through, as she quickly shed her jacket and took a stance. Naruto leaps off of the men he had beat and he said, I don't want to hurt you. Lara said, Then let's kiss and make up, as she sent a kick at his head. Naruto ducked and went to punch her exposed ribs when she backflipped. He blocked the flip, shoving her forward, making her lose her balance as he charged at her. She dodged his punch and molded her body around his arm as she sent an elbow for his head. He ducked his head and tripped her foot out from under her. Lara rolled away and then mule kicked him in the chest as he turned to attack her. Naruto flew back a few feet and he rolled out of a knee driver she tried to give him. As he stood up he smirked and Lara narrowed her eyes and he sent a feint to her face while she went to duck under it only to receive a knee in the chest, but she rolled with it and tripped his leg, but he grabbed her arm, rolling her over and pinning her to the ground with his arm across her throat and said, Still want to kiss and make up? Lara smirked and Naruto stiffened and looked down and found her pistol against his crotch and she said, Do you? Naruto said, I should have known you would use those. Lara said, It was all out. You should. He dove his lips on hers, shocking her, and he used that moment to snap her pistol from her hand and pressed it against her neck and said, It was all out after all, as he jumped back. Lara glared at him and he slipped her clip out and tossed her gun back and then the clip, and she reloaded it and slipped it back on her hip and said, So how good is he, Rift? Rift said, He's on par with my elites, but only because he has a speed advantage. His body adapts to weight training and allows him to increase his speed at 2 to 1 vs anyone else. In one-on-one hand-to-hand he will usually come out on top, but when he get 3-on-1 he loses his advantage if he doesn't use weapons. If he uses weapons then it's around 5 to 1 odds before he gets into trouble, and that's not counting marksmanship. Heavy weapons he had, but light firearms, he's as good as you. Lara looked at the men still on the ground and asked, How did he beat them? As she moved her head toward the pile of men. Rift said, Oh that. Lara said, Yes. Rift said as he looked sheepish, Well you see Naruto said, Give it. As he held out his hand toward Rift. Rift looked at Naruto and Naruto said, You remember the bet, give it here. Rift sighed as he reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope and handed it to Naruto. Lara asked, What's that about? Naruto smirked and said, Just some negatives of your 21st birthday. Rift paled and Lara turned her head to Rift and said, You told me those were destroyed. Rift said, Well you see. Lara began shooting the ground at his feet and he began to run away as she chased after him. Noah, who had followed Lara there, asked, So what's the big deal about a picture of her on her birthday? Naruto pulled out a photo out of his back pocket and said, Enjoy, as he walked away. Noah looked at it and went wide-eyed and thought, Happy birthday indeed. I didn't know that was even possible. This will be blackmail for years. As he looked at a photo of Lara passed out drunk with a birthday hat shaped like a cone on her head, with her sitting on her head with the cone looking like it was going in her and both her feet touching the ground in front of her, with wearing a pair of Speedos that just barely covered her and a sports bra with a party blower in her mouth. When Lara came back she held out her hand and Naruto smirked and said as he held the envelope, On one condition. Lara glared and said, And that is? Naruto said, You show me that those photos have not been doctored and that you can really bend like that. Lara asked, Why do you want to know? Naruto said, I got a bet with the cook here. He says that you really are that flexible while I think they've been doctored. If I lose I have to drink his potato whiskey. Lara smirked and said, Deal, but not here. Naruto pocketed the envelope and said, You name when and where. Laura said, follow me and we will go back to my room. Naruto nods and followed her, and when they got back to her room she sighed and felt like she was going to do a push-up and then arched her back and rolled until she matched the position she was shown to be in the photo. Naruto said, okay, I believe it. As he tossed the envelope and she stood back up and said, now let's go see that cook. When they got to the mess hall Laura said, he lost Remy so he's here to drink your whiskey. A man behind a counter smirked and pulled out a bottle and said, remember kid, the entire bottle. Naruto sighed as he walked over and took the bottle and opened it and began to drink. As he finished it he asked, what now? Both looked at him shocked and Laura said, that should have knocked you on your. Naruto said, one of my old senseis taught me how to go from piss drunk to sober in less than a minute. With a smirk and said, not bad taste though, got any more? Remy shook his head and said, damn, here I was hoping to make the hotshot captain here make a fool of himself. Laura blinked and said, Captain, as she looked at Naruto. Naruto scratched the back of his head and said, you see, there was a sort of rivalry from another unit who stopped by the base here and this one. When they saw me sparring and didn't show any sign that I was enlisted they sort of threatened the entire base, so I sort of challenged the captain to a one-on-one match and he bragged and said if a civilian can kick his he give me his rank and retire. Needless to say he's a civilian now. I thought he was just joking but a couple of generals took his word to heart for some reason and overlooked me being a civilian when they heard I was here under a request from you. Laura shook her head and said, so you're an unlisted captain. Why am I not surprised? Naruto shrugged and Laura said, so you ready to leave? Naruto said, are you going to start training me yourself? Laura said, yes. Naruto said, can I get my gear or does it have to stay here? Laura said, no, I already paid for it so bring it along. You're going to need it. Naruto said, right. I will meet you at the gate in an hour then. Laura said, sounds good. Naruto turned and left and after he was gone she asked, so what's really going on Remy? Remy said, the base is being put on alert. There's been a couple of bombings at some of our other bases around the world. Nothing severe but a motor pool and radar site were both destroyed. Favor or not the kid still has to go. Laura nods and said, okay. So how good is he really? Remy said, from what I can tell he's actually gotten as good as he appears. I can't tell you how many of the guys have had to go see doc to get treated for injuries. He up at 4 every day and crashes about 11 and takes Sunday off to rest. Laura nods and said, it's good to see you again Remy, I still can't believe you handed in your stars for an chef's hat. Remy said, I'm an old warhorse Laura, I've been in the military since I was 18 and I'm 50 now. Military was cutting back so I either had to retire or change ranks. The fact I like to cook gave me an excuse to still be around. Laura said, well take care of yourself. I got to head out. Remy nods and said, see you Laura, as she turned and walked away. When Naruto met back up with her she said, you ready? Naruto said, yeah, just left a few surprises for the guys back at the barracks. Laura asked, do I even want to know? Naruto said, nope. As they left the base. Back in the barracks a poster of Naruto and the rest of the squad in a group picture all at the victory dinner after Naruto beat the shit out of the captain in the other squad and Naruto was standing on a GP. Drove through the wall when he tried to learn to drive, was plastered to the floor. When they boarded the airplane Naruto sat down in a seat and asked, so what's going to happen now? Laura said, I am taking you to a jungle country to an area where a tomb is I raided about 6 years ago. I have placed a picture of my room in it along with a remote that will shut off that little watch that is keeping you from jumping. I want you to find your way through the ruins and find the picture and remote. We will land about 5 miles away from the actual temple and I won't be going with you. You will have to find the temple by heading north of where we land and find the items. If you can make it back to my home through the temple, then I will show you some pictures of places you appeared in history to see if you can jump to them. Either live completing your next journey or die in the temple. As a Tomb Raider you have to rely on yourself, your equipment and your skills. Anything and everything can be a deadly trap. You will carry only what gear you have with you. Do you understand? Naruto nods and Lara said, "Good, get you some rest. I will wake you when we land." Naruto sighs as he tried to get comfortable and Lara looked at him and thought, he's grown a lot over the last few months. He's almost seems like a different person, but I can tell in his eyes he's the same. A few hours later Naruto was awoke by Lara who said, "This is where we part ways for now. If you can survive then I will see you soon. Good luck." Naruto said, "Thanks," as he walked out of the plane and watched as it slowly left and he thought, head north huh. As he started to walk away from the dirt road they had landed on and thought, I don't think this road was originally made to be an airstrip, as he looked around and saw jungle. He then began to trek north. As he was walking he was looking around and thought, this is not like the woods back home. Snakes, spiders, what the hell is that animal? As he saw a gray-looking bear. Naruto soon found what appeared to be moss-covered stones and he began to look around, and as he walked he heard the sound of creaking wood before he felt himself falling. When Naruto landed he was in a dark room and he thought, great, just great. As he pulled out his flashlight and thought, snakes. I hate snakes. As he saw around 40 snakes all around the room he was in. He began to look and he noticed a set of stairs leading up and he slowly began walking around the snakes to make it to the steps, avoiding the snakes when they reacted to him. Soon he made it up the stairs and he saw a room with stone faces on both sides of the room and dirt-covered squares all over the room. He frowned and thought, why do I not like this? As he slowly began to step but he felt the stone moved and jumped back and he saw something fly by and he looked and saw a little piece of wood sticking out of the wall and thought, mini Senbons. As he looked at the step he stepped on and then looked around the room and he put his hand together and said, Kujubunshin no Jutsu. And another him appeared and the clone walked over and stepped on the stone and a few seconds later it went up in smoke and Naruto blinked and thought, that hit about hip level. Wait, how did I know where it hit? As he created another and sent it back down to the snakes and a few moments later his eyes went wide and thought, at least he killed 5 of them, but it seems like I learn whatever they do after they're destroyed. As he began to slowly walk across the room avoiding the stones he saw that were covered with dirt to avoid being hit with the Senbons. When he made it to the next room he saw a large pool in the room and he looked around and thought, what now? As he tried to find a way out but didn't see anything. He frowned and he looked at the water and thought, maybe, the water is rolling a little so there must be an inlet for it and perhaps a way out. As he created another Kujubunshin and frowned and thought, I need to stop using those because when I make just one I feel a lot weaker. And the clone leapt into the water and began to swim down. A few moments later Naruto sighed as he jumped in the water and began swimming for the hole the clone found. As he made his way down he saw it looked like a man-made tunnel, so he sent chakra to his hand and began pulling himself along by grabbing the wall, moving quickly. He felt his lunges burning and he soon saw he could swim up and began going as quickly as he could. He finally burst through the surface gasping for breath and he looked around and saw he was in a room like before, except he saw where someone had made a fire once and thought, might have been Lara. As he climbed out and nearly fell over as he felt the extra weight from his gear on his back being wet and he sat down to rest and dry off when he heard a growl. He just barely had time to move as a wolf jumped out of the shadows at him. Naruto quickly dodged again as it tried to attack again. Naruto pulled out his knife and as the wolf tried to attack again Naruto sliced down its side. The wolf yelped as it landed and Naruto threw the knife, killing it by hitting it in the head. Naruto sighed as he looked at the wolf and he got his knife and he began walking out of the room, and over the next several hours Naruto found many more traps and a few more animals that tried to attack him. He soon came to the last room he could find and he saw water was going through the room and he thought, might as well. As he jumped in. He soon found himself being carried by a lot more water, being pulled into an underground river, hitting the walls, and he had the wind knocked out of him and he tried to hold on to his breath as long as he could, and right when he was seeing spots in his vision he suddenly found himself in mid-air and he gasped air as he fell into a pool below. As he surfaced he looked around and saw a room with a modern table with some standard MRE, and he got out of the water walking over and he saw the picture and a small device and he glared at them and opened the MRE and began to eat before he picked up the device and the note under it which read place on top of watch, and after he did he looked at the picture and felt himself jump and he found himself in Lara house again and he heard the sound of a lock being unlocked and he turned and saw Lara and Noah walk in and Lara blinked and said, "You're getting water all over my floors." Naruto glared at her and said, "Well, I did almost drown twice." Lara said, "Get over it. I don't know how you made it through there that fast, but good job. Noah, get him some dry cloths and a warm meal and tomorrow we will see about sending him to the past." Noah said, "Right Lara, follow me Naruto." Naruto glared at her one last time and followed Noah. The next morning Naruto woke up and soon found his way to the main living room, waiting as he looked around and saw several pictures and objects and he began to think about his life. About an hour later he heard footsteps and he saw Lara and Noah both coming into the room and Lara said, "So are you ready to start?" Naruto nods and Lara said, "Well, let's begin with the one I am most interested in." As she showed him the picture of the ancient writings and like before he disappeared. About a week later Naruto reappeared and Lara, who was hanging upside down by two ropes, landed on the ground softly and said, "Well, what happened?" Naruto was again and Lara eyed him and she winced when she saw his back and asked, "How did that happen?" Naruto sighed and said, "The pharaohs and he had all these people enslaved and he used whips to make them work, and if they did not reach their goal for the day they were refused food and water. I refused to listen to his crap, so he decided to make an example of me and had 30 men take turns using whips on my back in front of all the slaves and said if I swore to listen to his every command that he would stop. When I was ready to break he told me to kill a slave woman who was pregnant. I told him to piss off and I jumped behind him and kicked his. When his guards came to save him I jumped away out of sight and they took him away to be treated. That night I went back to where the slaves were and I used jump to take them to a river about 10 miles away and I used my Kajbunshin to make it appear they were still there. The slaves then left the river getting the hell out of there and I had all the clones stay inside the slave shelter, and when the guards came to get them I attacked the guards and kept forcing them to get more reinforcements. Finally when the pharaoh showed up I used Kyuubi chakra and told him I was his death, and then I waved my hand and had each of my Kajbunshins go up in smoke and told him to retreat or I would do the same to him and his men. They fled and when I went back to the river all the slaves were gone. Lara said, "Question, what's a Kajbunshin, what's a henge, and what does Kyuubi chakra look like?" Naruto closed his eyes a moment and red chakra slowly covered his body and then he put his hand together and said, "Kajbunshin no jutsu." And Lara's entire mansion was filled with Naruto, and then Naruto said, "Henge." And they all changed into his harem jutsu. Lara blinked and Noah said, "My god, his own personal harem." Naruto released them and after everyone coughed from the smoke Lara said, "So that was the weapon that they talked about. So tell me, why did when you Kajbunshin changed into women did they feel real?" Naruto frowned and said, "I don't know." As he changed into his sexy jutsu and he grabbed his chest and said, "Weird, when I invented this henge I never noticed that these became real. At least I think they're real. Hey Lara, are you sensitive? Noah snickered and burst out laughing and Lara eye twitched and said, I don't know, perhaps you would like to find out as she walked over and grabbed Naruto nipple and twisted it making him scream out. Lara let go and said, don't you have any tact and manners? Naruto said, no, not really. Nobody ever taught me any. Lara slapped her head and said, Kami, why must you make blondes so dumb? Naruto had a vein appear in his head and he changed into Lara and said, Kami, why am I such a stuck-up bitch? I swear, I think I need laid. In Lara voice. Lara glared at Naruto and Noah sat down and said, now this is something the world would pay to see. The famous Lara Croft kicking her own. Lara said, I don't need laid and I am not a bitch. Naruto said, please, I heard all about you. You only go with the bad boys who only can stay for a one-night stand. What's wrong afraid of commitment? Lara pulled out her pistol and pointed it at Naruto and Naruto still hanged into Lara said, what's wrong? Did I hit a vein? I can see it in your eyes. Lara said, see what? There's nothing you can see in my eyes. Naruto said as he slowly started to walk forward, bullshit, you're afraid. You don't let anyone get close because you're afraid to get hurt. Rift talked about you a lot. Told me how you would volunteer for every one of the dangerous missions where odds are you wouldn't come back. He told me how you would come back and work yourself to exhaustion so you wouldn't dream. That's why you became a Tomb Raider, isn't it? You're afraid to live for the future so you're stuck in the past. Lara's hand was trembling and Noah started to say something when Naruto shot him a glare that promised pain and Naruto said, tell me Lara, who are you really? Are you Lara Croft, the world-famous Tomb Raider, Lara Croft, the suicidal special forces specialist, Lara Croft, knighted lady of the Queen, or are you Lara Croft, the woman who's so scared of losing things close to her that she's dying inside every day? As he stood right in front of her an inch from her face. Lara put her gun to Naruto's temple and said, get out. Naruto said, who's telling me to leave, which Lara Croft is it? Noah said, you heard her, get out. Naruto turned back to normal and said, you're just like I was, that's why we both can see the pain in each other's eyes. We both are scared because of our past, we let it control us. Unlike you, someone showed me what I've been truly missing in my life before she died. If you took your head out of you would see what's in front of you the entire time, the one who's beside you even now. I agree with you that I was sent here to learn, but I don't think it was skills I was supposed to learn from you. I think it was what I would become if I didn't change. As he grabbed his gear that Lara bought him and he was gone like he never had been there. Lara glared at where he was and said, who does he think he is? Noah sighed as he placed his hand on her shoulder. Naruto appeared in the middle of the woods and he thought, great, where am I now? As he was again and he went into his mind and grabbed his gear and slipped it on. He then heard gunfire and a chopper overhead and he blinked as he went toward where he was hearing the gunfire and soon he saw a camp in the middle of the woods with barbed wire around it and sandbag walls. He looked around and he saw someone coming out of the woods and Naruto said, hey, drawing the person attention. The person looked at him pointing a machine gun at Naruto and said, who are you and what are you doing here? Naruto said, I got lost on the road of life. As he scratched the back of his head. The person's sweat dropped and said, who are you and what company are you? Naruto said, Captain Naruto Uzumaki, Special Forces of Her Majesty Royal Forces. The person asked, what are you doing here, Brit? Naruto thought quickly and said, my squad and I were to be deployed. I got separated our jump when I was blown of course from RLZ. First time here so I just heard the sound of gunfire and came to check it out so I could hopefully hook back up with my unit. The person said, you look a little young to be here, kid, or a captain. Naruto said, Screwed the CO wife and got promoted and then sent here after he found out. The guy snickered and said, you know, that actually sound a lot like me except it was the general daughter. The name's Private First Class Eddie Total, but you're going to have to see the call about what to do with you Brit. Don't try any funny business and I will take you to see him, but if you try anything friendly or not you're going home in a bag, as he motioned with his gun. Naruto nods and walks toward the camp as he felt the guy behind him still had his gun on him. Naruto was watching as they walked and saw some men putting bamboo spikes out of the ground, and Eddie said, "Punji sticks, but we don't dip them in the same stuff Charlie does." Move. Naruto nods and soon walked up a small hill where he could see an American flag and soon saw a strong-built blackish-brown hair, and Eddie said, "Call. Kirby, I got a guy here to see you." Kirby turned and said as he eyed Naruto, "Yeah, what you want?" Naruto sighed and said, "Name's Naruto Uzumaki, Captain, Special Forces of Her Majesty Royal Forces. Got blowed of course from the rest of my unit, and by the time I made it to the LZ it appeared they had already moved out. Been in the woods a couple of days and heard the activity from the camp here. Private here was coming out of the woods when I called to him to alert him of my presence, and now here I am." Kirby glanced at Eddie and said, "So what's your unit doing out here? Communications haven't been that great lately, so we hadn't heard anything about any of you boys being here in our area, and with Charlie around your unit's most likely on radio silence." Naruto thought. They both referred to Charlie, and Noah said I was in Vietnam, so perhaps that's where I am. I hope so, or I am as good as dead with the shit I'm saying, and said, "We were supposed to be a recon and deployment into a possible gathering of VC heads. That's all I can say." Kirby frowned and said, "I see, Total. Get this guy squared away in the barracks, but stay with him. Until I can get info from HQ, I am going to give you the benefit of the doubt for now, since our outpost here is short-supplied and could use another set of hands. Stow your gear and then help with setting up the northern wall. We're still trying to repair from our last encounter with the local VC." Naruto said, "Thank you, Call," with a salute. Kirby punched Naruto in the face and said, "What the hell you doing, boy? You a damn greenhorn. Don't you know not to salute in wartime in enemy territory?" Naruto rubbed his jaw and said, "Sorry sir, I just recently been deployed sir, so I haven't actually seen any combat." Kirby said, "Then how the hell did you make it here and survive a couple of days out there?" Naruto said, "Real lucky I guess. I'm good at evading detection when I want to be." Kirby said, "Well, don't do it again, we got VC everywhere." Naruto said, "Sir, yes sir," as he stood up. Kirby said, "Get him out of here before I decided to put a bullet in him, Private." Eddie said, "You heard him, let's go." Naruto nods and follows Eddie, and Eddie said, "You know that was pretty stupid." Naruto said, "It's a talent." Eddie sighed and said, "You're just like my brother Rick." Naruto stopped and thought, "No way, he's the general brother," and said, "Your brother in the forces?" Eddie said, "Yeah, he's in Her Majesty forces like you. Got set up by his girl to take the fall for some robbery after he moved there and became legal resident, and he either had to join up or go to jail, so he enlisted. Hadn't seen him since I got drafted though." Naruto said, "Don't worry, I'm sure he's doing great." Eddie smiled and said after they stowed Naruto's stuff, "Come on, let's go work on the wall." Naruto and Eddie began working on the wall, and he talked to the others as he learned how they set up traps, and at the end of the day when the wall was finished, the guy said, "Hey, let's take a picture and show we actually had a wall here before Charlie comes back and breaks it down." Naruto snickered at that along with the other guys, and they lined up on top of the wall with Eddie and Naruto side by side, and the picture was taken, and Naruto went back after getting something to eat and fell asleep shortly after that. A few hours later Naruto heard the alarms go off and gunfire echoing as he jumped out of bed and grabbed his stuff and was heading out of the door when an explosion rocked the barracks and he jumped again as the building collapsed. When Naruto awoke he found himself in the middle of a camp with a bunch of people in animal skin cloths and feathers and he thought, "Oh boy," as he sighed. Naruto soon found himself being led before an elderly-looking man which reminded him a lot of the Hokage, and even though Naruto could tell they were speaking a different language he also could understand every word, and after the man asked who he was, pale one Naruto said, "I am Naruto Uzumaki and I am a traveler learning the ways of the world." Having studied a little about American history trying to remember Selen, he recognized the people as Native Americans and knew a little about their ways. The chief then asked how he got there and why his men found him in the woods asleep. And Naruto said, "I came across Great Sea and have been traveling looking for food and shelter." The chief asked, "Are you a warrior?" Naruto said, "I have been to protect my people, but that's been long ago." The chief eyed Naruto and asked, "What do you plan, pale one?" Naruto said, "May I learn the ways of your people? I wish to learn all things I can." The chief thought several moments before agreeing, and Naruto over the next 4 years was taught the ways of their people about hunting, traveling, trapping, fishing, weapon making. Naruto enjoyed his time there, but then Naruto awoke after feeling himself jump again and he blinked and saw himself staring down a very familiar looking set of pistols. Naruto said, "Hello Lara." Lara said, "Hello Naruto, been a while." Naruto said, "Yeah it has. So what do I owe the pleasure of the usual friendly greeting?" Lara said, "You scared my daughter when you jumped here." Naruto said, "Really? Who's the lucky guy?" Lara smirked as she put the gun away and said, "Noah." Naruto blinked and smiled as Lara sat down and said, "So how you been?" Naruto said, "Good. Spent a day in Nam and then 4 years with a tribe of Indians in North America." Lara said, "I see, so why are you here?" Naruto said, "Don't know, I went to bed in my teepee and then I woke up here." Lara sighed and said, "It's been nearly 8 years since you were last here." Naruto said, "I see, time's strange I guess. I feel like I am losing myself every now and then." Lara asked, "Found happiness?" Naruto said, "Friends yeah, loves no." Lara said, "Look, I want to say something. I am glad you jumped back here because now I can tell you thank you." Naruto blinked and asked, "What?" Lara said, "After you left I lost it, you had blew my emotions completely away, I shot Noah." Naruto blinked and asked, "Is he okay?" Lara said, "Yeah, he's taking Naruka to her piano lesson." Naruto said, "Naruka, I'm honored." Lara smiled and said, "Thanks, I wanted to say thanks because if you wouldn't have done what you did I never would have shot Noah and then never would have seen what I was really missing. You were right, he was right beside me the whole time and I ignored him. As he laid in the hospital bed I realized his feelings for me and I tried to hide from him, but the bastard put a homing chip under my skin so he could always find me. I went down a tomb in South America and thought for sure I was going to die when it caved in on me. The little bugger contacted a few associates and tracked me down and saved my. I gave up raiding and we got married and had Naruka. Noah named her while I was still out from labor. Showed me if it wasn't for you we wouldn't have had her, so thanks." Naruto smiled and said, "I am glad you finally found happiness and opened your eyes. I don't know why I did it, but I just couldn't stand seeing the pain in your eyes, and I remembered when I kissed you Noah wanted to strangle me afterwards but kept his calm, but I could see the hate in his eyes." Lara said, "Be right back," as she left the room. Naruto looked down and saw he was in a pair of silk pajama pants and thought, "That's new." As Lara came back with a bag and said, "Keep this with you so when you jump again you can have it. Inside are the directions on how to make bullets and gunpowder. My guns, holsters, and also a few other things I think you might like. I figure if I don't need them any longer then you might make use of them. As she handed the bag to Naruto. Naruto grabbed it and said, "Thanks," as he was gone again. Lara sighed and said, "Goodbye," as she looked down. A few moments later she heard the door open and a scream of, "Mommy," so she smiled and walked to the living room where Noah and her daughter was and Noah asked, "So where is he?" Lara said, "Gone again but I got to talk to him and tell him thanks." Noah said, "Think he might be back again?" Lara said, "I doubt it. I think the Oracle decided to give him closure and us as well. He's lost in time." Naruto asked, "Who was he, Mommy?" Lara smiled and said, "A very old friend." Noah said, "Are young depending on him?"